Well, we can go ahead and get started. So first, I will introduce myself. So I'm Jaymie Best. I am an account executive on our enterprise team here. My background is in government relations. So I worked for a National Trade Association for a number of years doing policy, grassroots, and PAC management. So have had a jack of all trades, and I think that translates well to ROI and determining kind of how we can show that. I'm also joined by my colleague, Meghan Fisher here. She's one of our solutions engineers at Quorum, and frankly is, the best of the best in terms of, how our platform can work and how, importantly, it can support your efforts. Secondly, I do want to acknowledge Molly on our fantastic marketing and events team. She is supporting us on the back end of the webinar. You'll see her name a couple of times in terms of questions, and she'll be, kind of working with us for any kind of back end work. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So quickly, do have to give a little bit of a shout out to Quorum. It wouldn't be a webinar without us talking a little bit ourselves. So for you that are not familiar with us, we are a public affairs software company that works with around 2,000 clients globally and around 50% of the Fortune 100 companies. We essentially allow organizations to manage stakeholders, political giving, track policy, mobilize advocates, and importantly for today's conversation, report on their impact all in one place. Our tools are really designed to help you break down those silos across your many different teams, or frankly, for smaller organizations, your many different colleagues, whether it's your federal, state, local, grassroots, or PAC organizations. So today we're diving into one of the biggest questions in public affairs. How do I prove my value of my work, especially when legislation doesn't move? It's one of the most frustrating things. You put in all of this work and then the bill doesn't progress or your initiatives don't move forward. We saw a record low number of bills passed on Congress last year. And again, it's something where we are running into some difficulties of showing that ROI. Public affairs work doesn't stop when bill count slows down, but it gets harder to show leadership in the work that we're achieving. We survey our clients every year, and we've found a couple of things. It's been a really challenging, 2024 for folks, or frankly, going into 2025 and 2026. It's really hard. Some teams are understaffed. It's difficult to move people into action. It's really hard to get the attention of lawmakers. And again, importantly for our conversation today, it's really difficult to communicate that value. It's a big thing that a lot of organizations, you're building long-term influence, but how do you prove it when the scoreboard doesn't reflect it? So that's a challenge our guest Steven Fenaroli's team has taken on directly, and the results are compelling. So with that, I'd like to introduce Steven to the stage. He's the Director of Public Affairs at the California Farm Bureau Federation. His team has done an incredible job quantifying influence, not just outcomes, and turning their work into a strategic asset inside their organization. So with that, Steven, appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Jaymie. Thanks, Meghan.
Great. Well, I think to kind of kick off our conversation, we'd love to have a little bit of a fireside chat with Steven. Again, we do ask that folks, put in your Q&A questions, and we're going to have more of a audience Q&A as we get towards the end here. So, Steven, to kick things off, tell us a little bit about your role. It's good to kind of learn a little bit about you and what the public affairs operation looks like at the California Farm Bureau.
Yeah, happy to. And shout out to all the people in the chat throwing up California from their offices today. So I'm Steven Fenaroli. I'm the Director of Political Affairs for California Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau represents about 24,000 members across California. We represent everybody, growing one of California's 400 specialty commodities. I've been in the GR political space for about 12 years. Farm Bureau, we have 7 lobbyists in state, and then we have a staff member in DC as well. And then we're also kind of bookended by our National Trade Association, American Farm Bureau. But we activate on the state level and federal level. And then obviously, we interact with our legislature, Congress, and then different regulatory bodies that we have to deal with. And those are things that, might be directly or might directly impact agriculture and farming, but then also things that have a secondary or a tertiary, impact, and think of, whatever it might be, transportation, air quality, lots of impacts. And so we have a variety of different members and people who have, I think, a lot of different focuses in the state. So, we do cover a lot, and I think Quorum's been a fun way to really get some of our members involved, and that has really shown through, and I think some of the things that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, Steven, appreciate you sharing that. And, I think a big point that you make there is, lots of different team members and lots of different functions within the organization. And again, something, where we talked a little bit earlier, helping you break those silos and having one platform and one team that can kind of, fulfill that function there.
I think, to that point, right, like I will say it's fallen on me a lot to do, whether it's reporting, to build out some of the alerts, really to kind of own the system. But selfishly, I think it's made me more valuable, but it's also, I think, helped us kind of really dig deeper into our memberships, and it's made me be, that expert in the platform, and also made, I think, really encouraged my leadership into, developing our grassroots and also really recognizing them when and where we can, because I think that their voice is really what matters in some of the work that we do.
Yeah, appreciate you sharing that. And again, it's at the end of the day, particularly in a federation or association, it is telling the stories of your members. And Megan, I think you have something to share on this.
Yeah, so I just started sharing my screen, and this is one of our reporting tools called Sheets. And feel free to zoom in using the magnifying glass if you'd like to zoom in just a little bit. But this is one of our reporting tools, Sheets. Think of it as an elevated Excel spreadsheet to be able to quantify, see your results from a little bit of a higher view. In this instance, let's say we wanted to track all of our engagements that we've had with federal officials. It could be state officials or local officials, but you're able to add in custom columns to be able to track strength of relationship, sentiment. We even have conditional coloring fields. So if you haven't met with an office, we can have that be red to really draw your eyes or bring your attention there in case that there is action that needs to be taken. So you can create a sheet on a variety of data sets, whether that be legislation, who the sponsors are, what the status is of that particular piece of legislation. And then you can share this externally, as Steven mentioned, with his exec team, with other people that maybe do not have Quorum user logins, that you're able to then show your work externally. And all of our reporting tools are auto-updating, auto-populating, meaning if you send this to someone on a Monday, but by Friday there's been movement in legislation, changes, meetings that have happened, you don't need to resend them a link. That report is going to auto-update based on what's happening in real time.
Thanks, Megan. And, a nice way we like to talk about it, it becomes a set it and forget it. So you can focus on the important things, building those relationships, managing your stakeholders, and leave a little bit of the monotony to our platform. Well, Steven, I know you've mentioned you've been in this space for some time now, and obviously supporting the Farm Bureau for a number of years. And so what does ROI mean to your leadership team? And frankly, over the years, maybe even before this organization, how has that evolved for you?
Well, I think my guess in the different roles I've had, it's hard to measure kind of this GR space, and it's hard to equate wins and losses directly because, we can either make bills better, we can make them worse, right? We can, there's ways to get things passed and killed that is maybe a little bit different than what people, might expect or what's easy to just put down on paper. There's things that we don't always want to put down on paper. I think that's a really critical point that, is worth noting. I'm fortunate that my leadership takes our advocacy really seriously at California Farm Bureau, to that point that, we're even at our convention in December holding a reception to recognize and thank the folks who have been engaged and involved And we're also kind of, not trying to leave anybody out, turning that into an opportunity for people to also sign up, knowing that, they should have already, they should be getting emails, but hey, people, things go to spam. But, that I think to them isn't just about how many, replies we get on bills or, does something get passed. But for us, we also really look at it as just engagement from our members and our members using and activating their voices on different issues. Now, I think it's a little bit tricky some days because, not everyone is going to activate on every issue. And I think for me and for us, it's really trying to figure out that sweet spot and how can we encourage, maximum amount of participation. And I think also to that point, it is about showing people examples of when our advocacy was able to make a difference, whether it was 1,300 replies to the California Fish and Game Commission on some proposed regulations that we were able to stop in their tracks. I think to me and to my leadership, those are concrete, measurable instances where our members were able to make a difference. And I think that those stories are ones that we've really highlighted and that we've really emphasized as kind of that power and that advocacy in action.
Yeah, appreciate that. And, I think it's always important to kind of have those individual stories that you can point to that, really help, that show that value to leadership, which again, not always is tied to a piece of legislation, as you kind of mentioned right there. And again, I think that a big part of Quorum is, again, or, frankly, in the space is how do I even visualize a lot of that data? So, we have a number of ways that, help folks do that. And Megan, if you have anything to share on that one.
Yeah, so we did have a dashboard to show in this current time, but there's an AWS outage right now. So some of our reporting tools are lagging a little bit, but we do offer a reporting tool called Dashboard. Think of it as a 30,000 foot view to create visualizations, heat maps, list widgets, bar graphs, line graphs, pie graphs, everything to help you visualize. And to Steven's point, that you can even make it specific to a certain product that you're using. So grassroots, able to see bar graphs of top offices that we've sent letters to. And then out of letters, calls, tweets, who are we, which modality are we sending the most? And really what's translating the best? And all that can be done through our dashboard widgets and visualizations. We'll send that and follow up again with the recording of this so that you're able to see that once our AWS is online and our systems is working.
Yeah, and I think a big thing here is, we want to help give folks ideas of different ways that they can start visualizing their impact. Because again, at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, particularly around budget season. So quite exciting. And so, Steven, I know
Jaymie, on that point, I'll just give a shout out. The Quorum team has been really helpful, right? I mean, from Quorum schools to, my account rep, there's never been a time where, hey, if I don't have a question, they can't at least point me in the right direction. And I know just of the stuff that I have, used tool wise, right? I think there's 10 times as many that I haven't quite touched on. So, just a little plug, a little shout out for you guys kind of in all the cool tools available out there.
Well, Steven, we always appreciate plugs for us. Well, I know you'd mentioned, sharing the specific, examples, and, gave a good example, a brief one on there on the USDA. So I'd be curious, how have you, can you share a specific example of how you kind of turn advocacy or stakeholder engagement into something measurable? Again, I think the big question for folks is, I'm doing this work, how do I measure that for folks out there? So we'd love to, hear a little bit on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think another really awesome success story goes back, beginning of the year. There were some USDA service centers that were on some of the DOJ cut lists, and one of ours was in Kern County, so it's one of the top agricultural producing counties in the state. And just I think from a logic perspective, it didn't really make sense. Why would you close one of the service centers in one of the, best performing counties? And so with our local county farm bureau, we activated really quickly. We were able to get the word out and got a lot of activation and activity on it. And with some really cool teamwork, we expanded kind of the scope of this campaign to neighboring counties which were going to be impacted from the closure. So we went about 2 counties around, and then actually to the county that had the next service center that was going to stay open, Tulare County. And so by incorporating these 3 counties, Kern, Kings, Tulare, we're able to kind of use the power of our membership. And we also encouraged, non-Farm Bureau members to engage, right? Because this isn't just something that was going to affect Farm Bureau, it's going to affect anybody in agriculture. And again, really happy to report that the service center stayed open. We were able to rally our congressional members who were, paying absolute attention to it. But I think just kind of that echo chamber and really making sure that they understood the importance of it, that did lead to a success story. I love these because it's always nicer when you do have a win that you can point to. This was one where it was a little bit more novel of a concept, kind of doing something hyper local at, just a 1 or 2 county level rather than a statewide or rather to our entire membership. But it was a great story and ultimately an even better result.
Yeah, and so a question that came to mind kind of off that, I know you'd mentioned right there, it's a little bit more of a niche because it, specific to a county. So how did you, in terms of, that engagement, how did you, get such a robust amount of folks to engage on, such a, theoretically small, political landscape that this was going to affect? How did you kind of bring the troops in for that one?
Well, and to your point, it is really that team effort. So, we send things out and I send things out kind of from that state perspective. And then, also engaging our locals, our local county farm bureaus and our local leaders kind of at that level to share organically. And I think we all know that a lot of people, they get their news, they get their information from their friends, from their different networks. But it was just one of those, beating something into repetition. We were able to get the word out and get people. I think, we probably had maybe a 2 or 3 week lead time, or sorry, I guess, in, timeline on the whole thing before we saw some action. And so through just different newsletters that we were able to link the campaign to, through different calls to action for those members of Congress, they all heard from our members in the Central Valley, hey, this is important. We need to keep this office open for a number of different reasons. And, it all worked out.
No, that's great to hear. And, something in addition to, the advocacy side of, hey, pointing to the letters that we're sending, Quorum can also support that function as something we call impact reports, which Megan can quickly share right here.
Yes, so I just started sharing something called an impact report. And what Quorum can do is upload your economic data into the platform. We geolocate it to which representative represents the locations of the information that you are inputting into the system. And then on top of that, this is the real value add, is being able to create templates to be able to showcase your economic data. Then you can easily create a template and duplicate it for the legislators, federal, state, local that you're meeting with, so that when your members, employees are going to meet with those on the Hill, they're able to reference this one pager to make sure that it's a very impactful meeting. And this can be accessed via mobile app as well.
And just, I think, Megan, that's a fantastic tool, because over at Farm Bureau, as we were holding our lobby days or different meetings, legislators always want to know, they always say, well, hey, make it local, right? Talk to us about what's happening in our district, what the agricultural impact is, what are you growing, what's your top commodities? These were things that we were doing by hand. I think a year later, we got creative and we were able to kind of put it into a mail merge. And that was really, getting sophisticated. So again, just kind of another call out that this sort of tool really, I think, makes all of our lives a little bit easier. And Jaymie, back to your earlier point about, I think 30-40% of us, feel like there's too much work. I'm in favor of any tool that can help reduce that workload.
Yeah, no, and again, this tool is really designed to, map out your impact. So when you share those stories with those policymakers, you can really tie it back to, the people at home and their districts, which again, as we all know, they love to hear from us, but they really love to hear from their constituency. So it's a really powerful way to help you do that. And I know you just, mentioned just talking a little bit about being overworked, and part of that overworking is how do you make your impact visible internally. Again, it's kind of that big question is, I'm doing all this work, I'm making all this difference, now I have to spend all this time showing that impact. How do you get around that at the California Farm Bureau?
I think, I'll answer it in a couple of ways. I'm fortunate, and I mentioned this, my leadership, they understand the value and they really encourage our members to be involved. But I think to that point, it's hard when that doesn't equate one-to-one in terms of successes, wins, getting a bill passed or killed. So I think that for me, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, but how can we have these marginal increases in terms of whether it's like participation or trying to see kind of what issues resonate with people. I think that it's about telling that story, and it's about conveying either what progress looks like, or what did an issue have. I mentioned those 1,300 letters to the Fish and Game Commission. We've been fighting an issue about some let's see what I mentioned, solar production. And so how can we show that we've continued to beat the drum on it, and that we've continued to engage our membership, and that's all kind of at the direction of our board and the priorities that they want to see from us. So I think that, again, just kind of really leaning in on the data and using that to tell the story on when there isn't necessarily that concrete win or result to point to, how can we lean back in on that data?
Yeah, and it's one of those things. It's important to have that data available to be able to kind of report those outcomes, and again, kind of break down some of those silos that exist kind of across the board there. So, kind of following up on your data, comment right there. What would you say are some of the most effective metrics or visuals that you've used to share that, show that impact, whether it's to your board, based on some of the criteria that they have? What's been effective for you and the team there?
So again, I mentioned we have 24,000 members. I wish that every single one of them would reply to every email that I sent, and that they would all send in letters on every single issue that I talked about. I think everybody on this call probably knows that it's not the case. I think, we are lucky when we can get, marginal participation. So for me, I'm really interested in understanding that a little bit better, and trying to find ways that I can just increase that participation. So things that I've played with that I think some of the metrics really pan out, are around open rates and click-throughs, and like, what can I do to make something, whether it's visually appealing or easy for my member to engage in. And it's a fine line between being personal, right, and telling their personal story, versus, hey, how can I get 2 or 3 quick clicks out of somebody and get them engaged on an issue? So I think also like changing subject lines and changing who the sender is on an email has been really important. Our grassroots program is called Farm Team, and I used to list the sender as a Farm Team alert, and changing it, something just as simple as changing it to Farm Bureau alert. We were able to see a pretty meaningful difference in those open rates. So I think I'm a pretty big outlier in that I keep my inbox at like 0 unread. Now, if you're still waiting for a reply from me, I promise I'm diligently working on it. But I know that not everybody's like that, and especially farmers, they're on their phones, they're up at different hours. So for me, it's really around kind of trying out some of those differences and seeing where we can get the most engagement.
Yeah, that's again, it's finding those little details, and frankly, at the end of the day, it's painting the picture that you want to tell, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to be able to show ourselves in the best light, and being able to bring in that data and share that data is really kind of where a lot of that works for folks there. And Meghan, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how dashboards can help that?
Yeah, dashboards again, and again, we apologize that we're having this little outage, but to be able to show that in easy visual format, so it takes all of your work that you're doing, combines it all together in easy to read bar graphs, pie charts, line graphs, list widgets, even number widgets. And then you're even able to see, to Steven's point, open rates, click-through rates, so that you're able to craft your messaging to what works the best. And just also a little shout out, even though I know we're talking about ROI and reports, but Quorum does do a lot with AI to be able to beef up your emails using AI to see where to place things, how to message things the best, as well as with grassroots, the ability to variate messages as well, utilizing our AI tools. So many different ways to kind of make sure that your messaging is exactly how you want it and is getting the best results.
Thanks, Meghan. And Steven, just a little follow-up. I know you talked a lot about, data, and, we here at Quorum, we think data is king. How have, Quorum helped you shift to more of an analytical reporting and, some of the work that you're doing?
Well, I think, again, to that point, it's all about making something localized. But I think that, we want to know where we've been with a legislator when my board asks. And so, again, to that point, where can I go tell the story and do that in a way that is succinct and easy for somebody who hasn't been around the platform in order to do that.
And what I pulled up here to show, to visualize here is something called our executive summary. So this looks very similar to a brief builder, but instead of the economic data, that's one version of a brief builder, then we also have something where you could create executive summaries as well. So this is great when team members are meeting internally. Maybe they want a one-pager of a particular legislator. How many grassroots actions have we made contact with them? What committees do they sit on? He's a champion of ours. Maybe we want to know how often he sponsors high priority bills that we're tracking. And maybe we want to see a list of his social media tweets about our organizations or our issues that we care about. So you can create executive summaries on officials, on pieces of legislation themselves, news articles, and you can combine all of the data within our impact report to really tell that story and lead a conversation internally with your team.
Thanks, Meghan. And again, these are designed to be templates. So once they are created, you don't really have to worry about them. They will just populate as your teams, using the data. And I know something that has come up as, hey, I'm a one-person shop. How do I stay on top of all this stuff? Once these are all created, they essentially, are always evolving with your organization. So very valuable and, allows you to focus on some of those more important things for you. So I think, Steven, a big question, particularly this time of year when folks are working on their budgets and we are quickly approaching the end of the year and into 2026, which is scary to think about already. If someone is trying to defend their budget or prove their value, in your opinion, where should they start? I think it's a very timely question and something, we'd love to have your thoughts on.
I think that we all have those stories of members advocacy something, but of talking to and having kind of that grassroots voice, interacting with legislators, because having worked in legislative offices before, those sort of stories are the ones that are going to move the needle more than any visit that I as a lobbyist is going to make. And so I can't walk into a meeting without having constituents, having talked to that legislator, or emailed them. And it is a lot easier to walk into a meeting and say, hey, you've had 35 messages from people on this topic, right? I know it's a big priority for your district, for your constituents. Let's figure out where we can come to a compromise, or make sure that we're all on the same page. So I think just really emphasizing, like, there has to be an advocacy component. Otherwise, you're leaving a lot on the table when you go into those meetings. And I think that it should be a defined part of your strategy, in terms of kind of making an impact. And again, that's legislatively and also regulatory. Those letters matter, whether it's form letters or not. It shows that there's interest on an item. It lets people talk about and tell their own personal stories. So I think that those are really key to having kind of that well-rounded approach when it comes to advocacy.
Yeah, no, great advice. And again, I think we've kind of shown today, it's telling those stories, having those stories available, obviously for kind of your external work, but importantly when you're talking internally to your to your leadership, to your C-suite, to why your team needs budget, or why we need to purchase X, Y, or Z to help with our function. Being able to tell the stories and point to those direct victories, I think goes a long way within the platform. So, what's your approach to making sure, the work that your team does, like meetings or advocacy, aligns with what leadership expects to see? I know you mentioned that your leadership and your board has been very, flexible and collaborative in terms of, being able to set those expectations. But what would you say is something that to ensure that there is alignment between your work and what your membership, your leadership expects out of you?
Well, I think so for us, and this is might be a little bit specific to us at Farm Bureau, right? But we set our goals, at the beginning of the year, what we're going to go after, both proactively and kind of defensively. And then obviously things come up, bills will get introduced that, we aren't, weren't on our radar. And so, again, it's kind of in line with how are we going about meeting and exceeding and making those goals. And then once we identify an issue as being just, that critical piece, what are we doing to defeat that? And I think that can also be, again, defeat is just one way to look at it, right? But how can we change it? How can we amend it? How can we get it into something that is palatable? And that comes, that can look like a few different things, whether we just get amended to the point to where it's, not a threat anymore, or we manage to, get the author or, other members to decide that it's not worth their time or energy. So I think that, again, just communicating those efforts and along the way to my leadership, that's what they really look for, and seeing, are we spending our time appropriately, and are the results ultimately, worth the amount of time that we've put into something.
Mm-hmm. And, I think you make a really good point there. It can't be just as simple as, did we pass a bill or do we defeat a bill? It's really about the measurables of, everything that went into that, conversation. And, a lot of the times it isn't necessarily that the bill will be defeated, but the bill, then becomes more palatable because, they have amended maybe a portion of our membership that it would be very directly affected like that. So it becomes a very powerful way that, when you're speaking with, your leadership teams, that, you make that case that it can't truly be about a defeat or a passage. It's about all the little things that go into it. And that's really, again, kind of the, gives you the tools to paint the picture that you want to paint to show kind of that value. And again, another way that Quorum can help support that a little bit as well. Great. So I think following up a little bit on, showing impact, we talked a lot about reporting so far, but I think a big one is, can you share a time where, taking a look at some of the data has surfaced a new insight that has changed, your team's strategy or focus? Would love to, hear any, specific examples on that as well.
Yeah, I think, and this happens pretty regularly kind of in our workflow. If there's an issue, that we're looking for votes on, or, need to make sure that we have kind of our hearings lined up. But, we'll go through regularly and make sure that as we're visiting with members of a different committees, that we know how many letters or, touch points we've had with that offices from our members. And that's really helpful, just to go into those meetings and use that as that conversation starter. And sometimes we're met with surprise and kind of, oh, I didn't know that. And, then we kind of know, oh, well, maybe their office isn't really talking to one another in there, and the constituent service person, is doing their own thing. Or otherwise, we also hear the, hey, you don't even have to start. I already know. I've already heard from 35 constituents on this thing. We're on the same page. We're good. And so that's always really helpful when those meetings are a breeze, and when we hear from people, obviously the thing that we want to hear. The flip side being that when it's an issue that we might be opposed to, we can go use those voices and say, hey, here are the 30 people. Here's the city that they're in. Hand it over to that office, and they're appreciative. And again, I can't say it swings the issue every time, but I'm very aware that, and having been on the other side of that conversation, you do a little bit of a double take when you're met with that sort of data.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly valuable. And again, being able to visualize a lot of the information, see that in real time, again, can really help shift a lot of that, policy priorities. And I think we saw a couple of questions about this, and we talked a little bit about it, but Quorum also offers A/B testing. So when we start to see some of that change where, hey, this, subject line is really making the mark. Steven, you showed a good example between, switching up what we call our names, right? Whether it's the farm team alert versus the farm bureau, things like that do make a difference, and the systems really kind of help design to get us there. Want to also make another quick plug. If you do have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A box. We want to make sure that we are, answering pertinent questions for folks. We've had a ton come in, but please, we want more. We want to make sure that, we can answer some specific ones. Stephen, I do have one from the audience, and also one that's near and dear to me, having worked for two ag members on the Hill for a bit. They're glad to see somebody on the Farm Bureau here, but at the federal level, many ag issues hinge on the Farm Bill. Every 5 year, it is mission critical for everybody. How are you measuring effectiveness on these issues? Where again, the bill is not every single year, but the work is every single year. How is the team, sort of measuring that one?
Well, I'm ripping my hair out over here because we are on basically year 2 of an extension. We were supposed to have a farm bill last year. We got kind of a skinny farm bill for Title I commodities, and so that's a challenge, right? And I think our every 5 year thing now is either 6, or we're at now we're at year 2 of this continuation. So it is a challenge to. I think just, again, going back to that point around measuring wins and losses. But when it comes to, something like the Farm Bill, there's updates that come, right? There's hearings that happen. And so there's bits and pieces of it that, we stay incredibly engaged with. And so I'd really just kind of lean in on, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's conversations and kind of understanding and the idea of, well, we don't necessarily know what member is going to be there in 5 years, to chair these committees, or exactly what Congress looks like. we can, look at ways to improve programs, and that's what we've been doing, is talking about and using all of last year and this year to talk about, which programs worked and which programs we would like to see modified, and really, being in California and, like I mentioned, having 400 specialty commodities. That's a unique challenge that not a lot of the rest of the country faces. And so I think, again, it's about kind of telling that story and really putting our flag in the ground early on things and saying, what's important to us, and letting members, both of the ranking party and the chairs of committees know what's important to us. And that's in just the different touch points we have, right, with their staff when they come to California to have district meetings with our members of Congress. Those are all sort of things that we are using as touch points, and that ultimately we go back and measure on, hey, were we able to get the things that we asked for in our pretty clear and defined set of asks.
Great, thanks. And, I think this is a good example of, a philosophy we have here at Quorum, which is, always on advocacy. Even if session is not in, even if your bill's not up, there's always that touch point you can be making, right? It's, maintaining that relationship that when something does pop up, they know you're the person they need to go to talk about X, Y, or Z. And of course, obviously very specific to, the ag bill here, but I have to imagine for, everybody on a call, if there is a piece of legislation, that pops up once a year, pops up every few years, in terms of authorization or whatever it could be, that, that's really our key principal bill, but how do we maintain and how do we show that, impact around there? And, Steven's sharing some really good ideas about, some of that touch points. And, Steven, I think one kind of specific to some of the grassroots work that, you're doing is, have you found, you talked a little bit about this, but have you found differences in message strategies for encouraging different actions? I know you mentioned kind of like, changing the title name, but in other words, have you found certain messages inspire, someone to call an office compared to write an email? How are you kind of framing that to, show the importance to your membership?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it it really depends on the member and on the issue. And for context, years ago, I tried to really personalize these alerts. Really tried to kind of get people to tell their story. Talk about what they farmed. Talk about their really kind of personalize what an item was going to mean to them. And I heard that was really well received. And at the same time, I heard from one of my board members that it was way too long and way too complicated, and that we needed to make it 2 clicks and we needed to, simplify it as much as possible. So I think that my 2 cents on that is, give people the tools and let them kind of figure out what best works for them. If somebody has the time to send an email, great. If somebody has time to, make a call and they feel comfortable, that's another option. I think that I've gotten better activation rates and better, participation when it comes to just emails and stuff, because I think people can just click the button twice and be done. It takes kind of a special kind of person who wants to go and make those phone calls. Now, I'd say, encourage a different group to do that, whether that's like your board, whether that's your executive committee, people who, or maybe you have a group that, like at Farm Bureau, we have the Go team, and that's an American Farm Bureau thing, but it's like that grassroots outreach team who, they're kind of versed on telling those stories. They've done a little bit more media training. And, if you feel comfortable about putting these different groups in front of legislators, go for that kind of when and where applicable. But I think it's really about meeting people where they are and giving them the opportunity to, to tell their story how best they want to.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great way. And just to add a little to that, kind of from my perspective as a former grassroots client as well, being able to segment your advocate base, similar to what Steven was saying, whether it's the Go team where we know that these people want to be more engaged on some of these issues, and being able to target your messaging for those specific groups. I think it's important to, as Steven said, meet your audience and make sure that you are sending the right message to the right people, and including things such as what issues are you interested in? How involved do you want to be in our organization? There's lots of different ways you can ask your membership, and for the most part, they are gonna be a little bit transparent with you, because they don't want you to ask them for writing a making a call when it's not something they would be comfortable with, or anything of that nature. Another question that's popped up, and Steven would be curious your thoughts, and is what are some less commonly used KPIs that teams should be using to measure success and show value both to executive and board of directors?
Ooh, I'd be curious to see what, if any, you want to throw out maybe to kind of lead the conversation.
Yeah, no, I love that. Turning it back on us to talk. So I think a big one that I always, used, and then, really talk about in examples and conversations with clients and prospects, every single day is, we talk a lot about, the legislative or regulatory, victories, right? That is a pretty, standard victory, not victory. I think something that's very exciting, and I think in this day and age has very been pronounced, is, the public discourse around these issues as well, because that is just important. If policymakers are talking positively, if they're raising awareness about the issues that you care about, that is something that could go a long way. And in particular, on social media, every single policymaker is either on Facebook, X, or YouTube. And being able to have those conversations and start tracking to say, hey, what, we've been having all these meetings with folks, say on energy and commerce or health or on the state level. Because we've had these meetings, we're now starting to see that legislators are talking positively about the USDA programs, or talking about any of the issues that we care about. That becomes very, I think, less commonly thought of KPIs in terms of kind of traditional government relations, that actually can be something that you can point towards to, show that value. Because again, it can't be just bills. It has to be more than that. And being able to tie, hey, these are all the meetings that we're having, to what policymakers are saying on social media or in committee hearings or press releases. We found that that's been a very successful way to, show effective government relations or advocacy without it being tied to some more of those traditional kind of values out there.
Jaymie, I think on that point, my experience has been that it's always great to kind of create that echo chamber as much as possible around whether it's a legislator but also, right, including their staff. I mean, you want them to think that whatever the issue, my issue is the number one thing that they need to pay attention to right now, and that they are getting just inundated with calls, emails, tweets, that everybody in their sphere is talking about how important it is to pass or, amend, whatever it might be, because that's what's most important to kind of that constituency. So I fully support, some of those just engagement pieces, because their office is looking at the same thing. Their office is seeing those same reports from their comm staffer and saying, hey, what's our engagement been, and what's been the top performing issue and this and that. So I think when and where applicable, trying to kind of make that echo chamber as much as possible is important. Yeah,
no, I appreciate your thoughts there. And again, it is finding all sorts of ways that we can show those efforts in KPIs. Again, another call for, if anyone has any Q&A questions, please post them in the chat. We're more than happy to dive into some of those.
And Jaymie, I wanted to share this because our dashboards are up and live now. So perfect timing as we're rounding out our conversation today. So I wanted to make sure that I got to show this. And again, we'll be following up with this as well. But here's an example of our dashboard reporting tool, which I mentioned is those visualizations. We could have number widgets so that we're able to see how many advocates have we acquired over the last month, how many actions, what's the email open rate. Then I'm able to see bar graphs, top legislators' offices that we've connected with, advocacy actions by date, heat maps of where advocates are located across the US. And then again, you're able to blend these different data sets together. So you're able to see maybe all the high priority bills that you're wanting to influence or impact and what status they're currently at. And then able to bring in our other data sets such as PAC as well, to be able to see maybe how many PAC contributors that you have that don't have meetings or that have supported legislation. So this is a great way to bring everything all in one spot, easy visualizations, again, to share externally, and they're all auto updating. So they're living, breathing reports that get auto updated in real time.
Thanks, Megan, and appreciate AWS coming back online for us. We love that. I will round out, as our conversations to a close. Steven, really appreciate you taking some time here. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. We know it's a pertinent time, and there is a lot going on. We'll finalize with one last question here for you, and this one's a little specific to the to your team. What has been your experience using Quorum Outbox and action alerts? Is there any specific examples of successful grassroots action alerts that you all have done? And again, don't have to get too personal, but if you have any open rate or click rates, what do you kind of consider effective? Again, thinking kind of more of the conversation in terms of what is value to your organization.
Look, I look at increases, right? Are we getting more people opening? Honestly, a small change and a small piece of work on my end where we saw a big change was making sure that our outbound email client was kind of entirely set up, and that we weren't kind of getting flagged in spam. And I know that nowadays with kind of all the changes that Google's making, Outlook, all these different services are making, spam is kind of all of our mortal enemies when it comes to getting these sort of things in people's hands. I can't recite, my open rates or click rates, off the top of my head. But again, I just look for, where are we seeing movement? And that comes from, I mentioned changing the name of the sender, changing the subject line. I think we all I try to be mindful in making sure that the subject line is kind of as appealing as possible. Obviously there's some of that A/B testing, which is available. But I would also say that for me, it's also about just getting more of our members opening and engaging in these sort of things. And I think year over year, we've seen more members engaged. And that to me is really important because I'd love to have 100% of my membership and then some participating, because I know how valuable it is to tell the story, but it's one of those where, hey, for a number of reasons, folks might not be. So I want to make it as easy and as simple as it is or it can be for them. I think that also means, and what I've really tried to reiterate to my team is, I think I'll at least just speak for, myself, but we get stuck kind of speaking in this legalese, in Sacramento jargon or DC jargon, and using lots of acronyms and things that, frankly, my farmer or rancher member don't care about when we're trying to convey an issue to them. I think that I've seen the most impact when we can make a direct correlation between what something is and how it's going to affect them and how it's going to affect their day-to-day life or make farming, harder or easier. And so I think that's where we've been able to see the most impact when it comes to engagement.
No, well, thanks, Steven. And sorry, we did have one last question that came in, which I think is very pertinent, is, surrounding kind of that spam issue that you talked about. What are some of the strategies, if you don't mind sharing some of the secret sauce of what you all have been doing to help address this issue, which I think, particularly in the grassroots space, is, really top of mind for a lot of folks.
Yeah, it's not a secret. And I went to my IT department and I said, or actually, I think I went to Quorum first and said, hey, is our email client kind of all set up? Are we good? and Quorum was able to tell me, oh, well, hey, there's this one last verification that we either never got around to or was missing, something like that. And so I went back to my IT department. And again, I don't know, how the back end of any of this works. So I went to smarter people than me, and we were able to get it set up. Now, I don't think we are getting around the spam issue. I think we have fewer going to spam, but by no means are we out of spam world entirely. But again, I think that's really critical in kind of, showing the system that you are a good actor and getting more people engaged so that it learns that you are, naturally to let more and more through. So it's a process, but it can be pretty discouraging when you hear from a bunch of your coworkers, oh, well, I saw it, I found it 3 days later in my spam, or I got it the next day in my spam report. So, I'd say just reach out to Quorum and figure out, what you guys can do on that end to, hopefully reduce that impact.
Thanks, Steven. And again, the plug. Well, we are getting close to time here. And so again, Steven, thank you so much for your time and your transparency, and to everybody that joined us on the call today. We hope we gave you some real world examples of how you can tell your story more effectively. As I mentioned, we will share some of these example reports to, again, start to get the brain juices flowing on, different ways that you can convey your value. So as I mentioned, we'll follow up shortly, and looking forward to working with all of you again. Thanks so much, everyone.